Welcome to Digging Deeper into Spiritual Practices, a Spiritual Seedlings interview with Nancy Flinchbaugh. I am the author of several books, including Awakening, a contemplative primer on learning to sit. I want my readers to have opportunities to learn more about the spiritual practices discussed in my book, so I'm interviewing some contemplative experts. You can find out more about my books on my website at spiritualseedling.com. Today I'll be interviewing Kathie Giorgio about her spiritual practice of finding happiness. Kathie is an author, a poet, a writing coach, and teacher, and the director of AllWriters Workplace and Workshop. Hello, this is a Spiritual Seedlings interview, and today I'm interviewing Kathie Giorgio on gratitude. So welcome, Kathie.
Thanks for having me.
It's nice to have you here. I just would like to start by asking you to tell me a little bit about yourself and how you happened to start a practice of gratitude.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I am primarily a writer. I've written my whole life, started writing before I even knew that was what it was I was doing. And that eventually branched into my teaching. I own a creative writing studio and I teach people to write, whether they're at the very beginning of it or whether they've already put out many books and just want some help to keep going. In terms of a gratitude practice, it's funny because I don't consider what I do a gratitude practice. I see where gratitude comes into it, but it started really as a way of trying to find a moment every single day that brought happiness. And it came about because of a horrific year that I had in 2017. Actually started in 2016, right after the election, when I was assaulted by a man wearing a Make America Great Again hat. And from there, spiraled into a year where I was diagnosed with breast cancer, where my husband lost his job twice, and where my daughter was so severely bullied at school, we had to move her to a whole new school. And when I was assaulted, I went into quite the spiral. I was afraid to leave my home. I was afraid of the world at large with what could have created somebody who would think it was all right to do this. And I could feel myself getting sadder and sadder and sadder to the point of not wanting to get out of bed in the morning, not wanting to do anything, losing my motivation for everything. And so I decided I would try to find one moment every day that would make me happy. And I started writing them down. Eventually gratitude came into that, but I think that came second. First was noticing the happiness to begin with, then came the being grateful for it. So I guess it is a gratitude practice, but I see it as a happiness practice.
Yeah, so kind of naming the happiness. And yes, it's kind of a unique form, which really has a lot to do with your identity as a writer. So what did you start doing? What was the practice of naming?
I started, it was a daily thing, and I just had to find one moment that made me happy, and I was going to write it down. But then I realized that being who I am, if I just started writing it down in a journal, that would have lasted maybe 4 or 5 days, and then it would have fallen to the wayside. So I put it on every day as a Facebook post, because then I had people holding me accountable and I had people watching it, and that makes you aware of I'm expected to do this, so I really need to work at it. I was amazed at the response. I had people coming on my Facebook page every day waiting to see what made me happy. and so then I went from there to putting it on a blog on my website, and I vowed to do it every single day for a year, which I did. I only missed one day out of that whole year.
That is very awesome. So I know you once said that this practice saved your life. How did that save your life?
Well, like I said, I was in this spiral where I was really underwater in sadness. and in fear. You know, when I was assaulted, all I was doing was walking my dogs around the block. And so it happened close to home, and it happened in the middle of the day. And then the response to that, because it became, I became on national news. I was one of the people that was listed as being involved in a hate crime after President Trump was elected. And so there was a very large public response. I began to receive hate emails and hate tweets and hate Facebook messages from people who thought I was lying and who thought that I was just trying to put down the president. Probably the scariest one I got was in my own physical mailbox, which was a note that said, "We know where your daughter goes to school." And, you know, so they were threatening my family. And I really felt overwhelmed and unable to move. And I'd gotten to a point where I couldn't leave my home. I couldn't even step outside. And so I honestly think if I hadn't started doing this, I would have stayed in bed. I wouldn't have gotten out, and possibly have gotten to the point where I would have taken my own life, because I was just so smashed by all of this. Finding the moment of happiness each day showed me that it's not big things. You know, you don't go out looking for rainbows. You don't go out looking for people saving somebody's life. I know one of my moments of happiness was sitting in my car. I was driving a convertible in line at Starbucks, and a star wrapper fluttering into my car, and how it seemed like a butterfly that was just for me. So these little moments began to add up. And I also learned that happiness doesn't happen. You have to look for it. And that saved me.
Well, it's just a beautiful practice. And like you said, it began with the assault, and then a series of things that seemed like each one got worse, you know, it's one thing after another. So to maintain this through the year was quite a spiritual practice that you had. And then it became a book. How did that happen?
This is the book, Today's Moment of Happiness Despite the News. What happened was, after I wrote the blog for a year, and it became quite popular, you know, between my Facebook page being flooded and my website crashed several times because of traffic. I got to the end of the year and my thought was, oh, phew, thank goodness I don't have to do that anymore. But people began to say, well, it's going to be a book now, right? It's going to be something I can buy and keep. And I said, no. You know, I wrote these things in maybe 15 minutes. I did not edit them more than just reading through them once to make sure grammar and spelling was correct. This is not polished writing. And I was saying, no, this doesn't represent who I am really as a writer. But my publisher came forward and said, Kathie, they're asking for a book. Don't you think we should do a book? And I said, it's 365 days of little pieces that are maybe 700 to 900 words. You're looking at a really thick book. And he said, it's okay, we'll play with margins, it'll be fine. So the book came out, and I never would have thought something like that would be out there with my name on it, but it is, and it's done very well.
Yeah, well, it's a great story, you know, and it's an amazing number of stories, how each day you found a little moment of happiness. And you continue to do it even after that first year, right?
Yes, I'm in year 3 now of doing this week's moment of happiness. I only do it once a week now. And there's times I wonder how in the world I did it every day, because, you know, even coming up with once a week, especially this year in the year of COVID, you know, has been difficult, but I'm doing it.
Well, I think they're very creatively written. Maybe they weren't up to your high standards, but every time I read one, I think, wow, how she does that. How does she do that? Because you just describe your life so well, and then a wonderful moment. So it's very uplifting. I think the gratitude practice helps not only you, but it helps other people too, to see the beauty in life, you know, in spite of the news. So my book that had gratitude as a practice was about contemplative practices. And I know that you do several different practices, contemplative practices, and one that you've been involved in a lot is the labyrinth. So could you tell me a little bit about how you got involved in the labyrinth and how you use that as a writer?
I stumbled across the labyrinth. You know, I had a friend who said, "You've got to try this. You've got to come walk a labyrinth. You'll be amazed how it feels and how it will bring you a sense of peace." And where I live in Wisconsin, there is a beautiful labyrinth, an outdoor labyrinth in West Bend, which is about 45 minutes from here. It's in a public park and it's maintained by a garden society. So that except for winter, there is something blooming every season of the year. So she took me and I walked it. And at first I thought, well, this is dumb. You know, I'm just walking, who cares? But there is something about walking and knowing you can't get lost. You know, that all you have to do is keep following the path and you're free to think, you're free to contemplate, and you don't have to worry about what are you going to run into. I had to worry about bees from time to time, but other than that, it's just a fabulous place. And I found as I continued, because I started looking for labyrinths wherever I went. When I traveled, I would look to see if there were labyrinths close by, and then I would go walk them. And besides being an emotional help, they were a help with creativity. I could walk a labyrinth considering what I was currently writing or working on, and then sit on the meditation bench and then wind my way back out. And by the time I got out, I knew exactly what I wanted to have happen next. And so I began teaching. It's a class that I do is called The Labyrinth and the Creative Process, that I teach for visual artists and for writers, where I will take them to a labyrinth, and as they wind their way in, they're just letting ideas come. And they jot them down in a notebook as they write. In the center, when they reach the meditation bench or the meditation center, they just start thinking about one idea that particularly calls to them. And then as they wind their way out, they focus on that idea. And then we spend the afternoon working on it, either painting or writing. So it's a wonderful way not only to soothe your soul, but to also harness the creative mind and help work your way through it.
That's very cool. Lauren Artris just came out with a new book about the labyrinth, The Path of the Holy Fool. And she's talking about the Grail, the story of the Grail, but it's really exactly what you're talking about, that what she's experienced too over the years with the labyrinth is it's a place of creativity, and things emerge from that contemplative space of the labyrinth. Well, okay, and so then also several years ago, you started a meditation practice. Why did you do that, and how does that help you in your life?
It pretty much came about near the time where the assault happened, and just my life is always so busy. You know, between my writing, I own my own business, which I work approximately 85 hours a week, sometimes more. I think it's more than that right now. And then having a special needs daughter, there's lots of chaos in my life. And I found that I wanted something to be able to calm me down. And several people have said to me over the years, oh my gosh, you have to try meditation. And it was always described to me as a time when you didn't think. And so I would sit down and try not to think, and boy, that lasted like 5 seconds. And I was off and running someplace else. So I thought it was physically impossible for me to meditate. Finally, somebody said to me, don't think of it as not thinking, but think of it as your thoughts going by. And they used the image of bubbles. Think of your thoughts like bubbles, and you just watch them float by and go away. And there was something about that image that made me go, oh, okay, it's not that I have to stop thinking, it's just I become an observer. I just watch them float by. This person also suggested I try Insight Timer, which is an app for meditations. And so I tried that, and I've found that I particularly enjoy guided meditations. Sitting in silence or sitting with white noise doesn't quite do it for me. A voice will do it for me. And sometimes I don't even pay attention to what the voice is saying. It's like that voice becomes a white noise. And so as a result, now I meditate at least once a day, usually before bed. I also try to meditate in between my writing time and when I start teaching in the evening, so that I have that break that helps me transition from being inside my own head with whatever I'm writing to being able to get into other people's heads and talk about what they're writing.
Well, you do an excellent job helping. Kathie's been my writing coach for several years, and I remember she started meditating while I was working with her, or she was working with me, and she tells me she meditates right before she talks to me. So
Yep.
she's always very focused, and I know sometimes mediation helps with that, helps with clarity of mind and relaxation and sleep. I think you said it was helping you with sleeping
Oh, it
too.
definitely helps me sleep. Yeah.
Did you have any advice for people that might want to integrate more contemplative practices into their life?
I think the best advice is to not walk in with any pre-existing ideas of what it's like. You know, if you walk into meditation thinking that you're going to have to be sitting on the floor, you're going to have to be on a cushion, you're going to have to be in the lotus position, and you're going to have to not think, it may not reach you. You know, the same person that got me into meditating said, he doesn't sit on the floor, he sits in his recliner. You know, he's pushing 70, and he's like, if I sat on the floor, I'd never get up again. And again, this was like a revelation to me that there wasn't a set pose, there wasn't a set pattern that you had to do for meditation, but that you could make it your own and learn what it is that makes you tick. I think some people need a dark room. You know, other people need to be in the light. So it's go in with an open mind of, I'm going to learn to meditate, but I'm going to make it my own. I'm going to understand what allows me to get into that state.
Well, thank you so much for sharing about your moment of happiness and your contemplative practices. And Kathie also is a writer with what, 9 books now? In addition, 12. I'm behind.
The 12 was just accepted. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's exciting. And I will share some information about how you can learn more about Kathie and her books. And maybe, I don't know, if somebody wanted to attend one of your labyrinth workshops, how would they do that?
There's actually going to be one. It's going to be in June. I would have to look at the date. If you look at my website, kathiegiorgio.org, and look under appearances, you'll see it there. It's going to be in a place in Wisconsin near Winona, Minnesota, so you kind of have to be in the area. But that will be the next one. We were actually going to have a couple this year. Of course, they got rescheduled because of COVID. So I'm hoping by June we'll be safe enough that we'll be able to do one.
Well, thank you, Kathie, for joining me today. And I really enjoyed listening to you about your contemplative practices. And gratitude.
Thank you for having me.
Have a good day.
You too.
Thank you for listening to this interview with Kathie Giorgio, an author, poet, writing coach, and teacher, and the director of AllWriters Workplace and Workshop. Kathie's blog that became a book is 365 days of today's moment of happiness despite the news, published in 2017 by Black Rose Writing. And what a year it was. Her husband lost his job not once but twice. Her autistic daughter was bullied on social media and moved to a new school, and she was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer. And yet, in this year of down, Kathie found an up. This is a powerhouse movement, a force that goes beyond positive thinking. 1 year, 1 woman, and many, many lives touched and changed. I encourage you to check it out. You can find Kathie's blog on her website at kathiegiorgio.org and follow her on Facebook at Kathie Giorgio. Kathie is the author of 12 books. 11 are available on Amazon and the 12th is coming out soon. Encourage you to check them out. And Kathie is the director of AllWriters Workplace and Workshop, an international creative writing studio in Wisconsin. If you are a writer looking for support in your career, check out the many offerings of Kathies Business, where you can find virtual classes and coaching to make your writing dream come true. She's certainly been a force in my life as she's coached me through 3 of my published books with a 4th on the way. This has been a Spiritual Seedlings interview with Nancy Flinchbaugh. You can find out more about gratitude and other spiritual practices on my website and in my book, Awakening, a Contemplative Primer on Learning to Sit.